The Japanese sword represents the solution of a number of engineering and metallurgical problems through a trial-and-error method. A sword was needed which would not break, which was rigid, and which would hold its cutting edge, qualities which are in conflict. Iron is soft and will not break easily, but neither will it hold a cutting edge. But solutions were found. By encasing iron cores in hard steel skin created by forging and reforging iron into multiple layers until it became steel, strength and flexibility were combined. To ensure that this edge remained sharp, it was tempered, while the main body of the sword was protected from the fire by a ceramic clay coating. In thinning this clay coating to achieve the proper degree of temper, the smiths learned to vary the process, creating beautiful crystalline patterns within the steel along this tempered edge. Those who built these swords, and those who wore them, felt that certain Buddhist strengths and virtues had entered the sword as it was forged. Earth, fire, water, and the pure faith of men were thought to have combined to create a thing of simple beauty and awesome strength. Insofar as we can tell, swords have been polished from the beginning in an attempt to reveal the clean elegance of its design and construction. The techniques of polishing, like those techniques employed in forging the blade, have evolved over many centuries. The first two stones are called Kongo-do, an artificial stone rather than a natural stone. These two represent two different grades of grit and are used in accordance with the amount of rust on the sword. We now see two additional stones called Binsei-do. The first of these is a gray artificial stone. The second yellow stone is a natural stone. The following stone is called Kaisei-do, and it is an artificial stone. The Chu-nagura stone is a natural stone, and the next stone, the Kaishin-do, is often used in place of the Chu-nagura. The Koma-nagura is a yellow-colored stone. Finally, we see Uchigamori stones of two distinctly different types. The first of these, the Habiki, is softer than the second stone, which is called the Jibiki. In addition to the stones, other simple devices play their part. The bucket of water, changed as the polisher moves from one stone to the next softer stone, also provides a cleansing material so that the polisher can continually see his own progress, and it provides a stabilizing weight to help hold the stone, too. The stone rests upon a wooden block called the Todai Makura, and Todai, a specially shaped piece of wood, holds the stone in place on the block. Pressure for this grip upon the stone coming from the polisher's foot, which rests upon the free end of this fumaegi, as it is called. The polisher is seated upon a low stool, a shogi, which positions him very close to his work and permits him to exert close control of the whole process. As he must do at every point in his work, the sword polisher first dresses the stone with which he's working. In this case, a mounded shape is given to the first stone, the Kongo-do. We are now shown the areas of the blade surface in the order in which the polisher intends to work. He starts with one side of the back surface, called the mune, and moves down the blade toward the point. He then polishes back up the mune surface on the other side of the blade. He next polishes the flat surface between the back and the ridge of the sword, an area called the shinogiji, toward the point of the sword, and returns along the same surface on the other side. The polisher then will do the tip of the sword, an area called the kisaki, and will then move to that blade surface lying between the ridge and the edge of the sword, an area called the ji. The posture of the polisher represents the style, or kamae, in which all polishers are trained. Because the work requires hours and hours of intense concentration, day after day, polishers came to the conclusion that this posture served best to ward off fatigue. Moreover, correct polishing techniques are keyed to this posture, so it is doubly important that the beginning polisher learn this kamae. It can take 6 months to a year for an apprentice to feel comfortable with the posture. may be useful to point out here that a polisher may spend as much time looking at the progress of his work as he does in doing the work. He must continually check this progress. The work is painstaking and exacting. The blade we are seeing is a 19th century blade which was badly rusted and nicked. Reshaping and restoring the lines of a sword in this condition can take 1 or even 2 days of continuous work. Polisher is now going to move to the G of the sword, the area between the ridge of the sword and the edge. By looking at the angle of the stone and the sword, you can see that he is polishing at 90 degrees to the long axis of the sword. This is a curved surface, and the polisher must be careful to change the angle of his hands to control the angle of the polish. This curvature is called meat, or miku in Japanese. To remove too much of this curvature is to ruin the shape of this particular blade. As we see the polisher return to the tip area, or kisaki, of the sword, please note how he locks his right arm around his right knee to stop or control the motion of the right arm and hand. Only the left hand controls the motion of polishing at this point. The right hand is repositioned when a slightly different angle is needed. It is very difficult to correctly polish these curved surfaces at the tip of the blade. Now the binsi do is brought into use by the polisher. This stone, a finer stone than those that have gone before, will be moved down the mune to the point of the sword and brought back up on the other side of the mune. Once again, the area above the shinogi, the ridge of the sword, down to the point will be done, and the polisher will then move up the other side of the sword. All the steps that the polisher has already done will be repeated with a finer stone, and we can see how the temper line, or hamon, begins to reappear at this stage. This is especially true in the Shinto and Shin-Shinto blades made after 1600 AD, since these blades often have very hard temper lines. As we watch the polisher's hands, we can see that he changes the angle of his strokes very slightly. He must see what his polishing is accomplishing. Once again, we notice that he must continually stop the process to examine his work. He must at all times be in control of a very delicate process. The angle has changed once again. He now changes to a finer stone, and once again we can note that the angle of his strokes have changed. But we can also see that the geometry of the sword is appearing in firm, sharp detail. The lines of back and edge and point are being established. Note, too, that the yokote line, that line which separates the tip from the body of the blade, must be reestablished by the polisher with each new stone as he moves through the polishing process. As the polisher clamps each stone into position, he places a sumagi under the stone to give it stability. The polisher now will change the angle at which the blade is moved across the polishing stone. This is done so that he can be sure that the marks left by the previous polishing process are removed by this stone. And he then checks his work to see that indeed the previous scratches are being taken out by the new stone. Were he to continue polishing at the same angle throughout, he would be putting scratches into scratches in the same plane, and it would be impossible then to eradicate the earlier and deeper scratches. Now the polisher changes to a finer stone, and he will slightly change the angle of his strokes as he moves the blade over this stone. Because of the harder tempered area of this sword, he changes the yellow binsei-do, a natural stone. The binsei-do is the last stone in which changes can be made in the polishing process. The foundation of polishing will have been laid by the time this stone is completed. Therefore, the polisher must now look carefully to see if he has the proper amount of niku, or meat, curved surface on this blade. He must be sure that the yokote has been put in position properly, for it will not be possible to change it later. We see on the surface of the stone a material which is usually called juice, bit of the stone itself, which is used as a kind of lubricant for the polishing process. He works now with the yellow binsei-do at the tip or kisaki of the sword. see that the yokote line has indeed been placed in position early in the process of polishing, and with each step of the stone, it is continued in its position. The polisher looks for any rough spots which may have been left on the blade. These, too, must be taken down at this stage. They cannot be removed later. Now the soft kaisei-do is brought into use at this point. The stone is dressed into the mounded shape. The stone, as we can see, is soft. The blade will appear to be rocked upon the stone during this polishing step. But note also that the left hand moves the blade forward. This creates a long, slanted, polished pattern on the blade, removing the scratches left by the previous and harder stone. We can see the pattern of this polishing in the dark gray marks on the top of the stone. Short and parallel. Perhaps it should be mentioned here that it is not unusual for a whole day to pass as one stone is moved from step to step or surface to surface on the blade being polished. To hurry this work would be disastrous, requiring that the entire job be started anew. Painstakingly, the scratches left by the previous stone are again removed, surface by surface, following the progression which was begun at the start, down the mune on one side, back up the other. Each stone follows its predecessor. The work is checked again. And the polisher now moves to the kaishin-do stone. Once again, we will dress this stone surface into the slightly mounded shape that is needed to accomplish this work. Once again, a rocking motion will be employed. Short, parallel strokes will be laid on the surface being polished. And once again, the angle is changed from that used in the previous stone. But as the work of this stone is completed, the polisher now makes some radical changes. Heretofore, he has changed the water in his bucket with each new stone, but now he removes this bucket completely and replaces it with the bucket he will use for the finishing stages of his work. The floor around him is scrubbed clean. His fingernails are scrubbed clean, and his hands are thoroughly washed. No grit or dirt or coarse material from the previous stages in polishing can be allowed to fall upon the work as the final stages are reached. Now he dresses the Koma Nagura in preparation to go over the same areas in the same order as before, but with this much finer stone, a stone which is quite hard. Once again, we see him using the rocking motion, and he will place lines carefully spaced the length of the blade. Juice, or togiro as it is sometimes called, is placed on the stone that appears whitish in our picture. The polisher continues the careful, controlled, rocking motion of the blade on the Koma Nagura stone. The Uchi-Gamori stone will now be used. This stone is placed on a folded cloth because the stone is slate-like in consistency and breaks easily. The cloth prevents the stone from rocking or moving. It is dressed into a mounded or rounded shape, just as the other stones also were dressed. Prior to the use of the Uchi-Gamori, the right hand of the polisher was usually and actually pushing the blade. But now we are seeing the right hand pulling the blade through the polishing stroke. Only on this stone is this particular action to be found. One and sometimes 2 full days of continuous and hard work are required with this stone, sometimes called the habiki or hado, in order to finish this part of the sword polishing process. The stone must be used over the entire surface of the blade as its predecessors were used, and the work is fine and exacting, and this accounts for the long time period required in its use. When the habiki stone is finished, all details present in the sword, in its hamon and hada, will have been revealed. The sword polisher now moves to the jibiki stone, or jido, as it is called. He removes all the juice from the stone so that no scratching is possible. And as he shows us, he will work now only upon the G, that surface of the sword, to which he points. He uses the Jido on the temper line, the hamon, and the stroke becomes shorter than heretofore. This step in polishing is basically intended to bring out the jihada, or the grain of the blade. It is on this surface of the blade, above the temper line and below the ridge, where we may see the laminations of which we spoke earlier. The many layers of steel created by the swordsmith as he forged the hard outer surface of the blade. We now see an uchigumori stone. It is split so that it is very thin. In fact, it must be backed with a thin rice paper to give it additional strength. This rice paper is attached to the stone with urushi, a Japanese lacquer. This small polishing stone will be called the hazuya and will be used to bring up the polish of the tempered line or hamon. Now, the same general process is followed again to create yet another small polishing stone, which will be called the jizuya, and this stone will be used in working only in bringing up details of the hada, or the laminations above the temper line. Here we can see how the sword polisher locks his foot behind his leg to set the correct posture for these operations in the polishing process. With powdered deer horn, he now removes all surface oil prior to this next step in polishing. He lets this powder dry and removes it, and with it removes finger oil, dust, anything that might hamper the polish. Now he addresses the stone in order to prepare the hazuya stones. They are rubbed back and forth on the dressed surface of the stone, cleansed, juice is carefully applied to the temper line of the sword, and with the small fragments, the polisher begins the very delicate job of polishing the hamon of the sword.